Every single day, a quarter of the world traded goods passes through a stretch of water narrower than the English Channel. $3 trillion worth of cargo every year. Oil tankers heading to Japan. Container ships bound for Europe. Grain shipments feeding billions. All of it funneled through a waterway so narrow that in some places you could swim across it in 20 minutes. This is the Strait of Malacca, and it's defended by pirates. Not a joke. Modern pirates with speedboats and automatic weapons operate in these waters right now, alongside some of the most valuable shipping on Earth. But piracy is actually the least of this strait's problems, because if this waterway closes, even for a few days, the global economy doesn't just stumble, it collapses. Gas prices would double, supply chains would seize, entire nations would run out of food. And right now, the world's superpowers are playing a very dangerous game of chess over who controls it. So here is the question that keeps admirals and economists awake at night. What happens when the world's most important choke point becomes a battleground? To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the Strait of Malacca actually is. Geographically, it's simple. A 550-mile channel of water between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. It connects the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, and through it to the Pacific. Without it, ships traveling between Europe and Asia would have to go thousands of miles out of their way, adding weeks to every voyage and billions to shipping costs. But this isn't a modern convenience. The Strait of Malacca has been the world's most important waterway for over 1,000 years. In the 7th century, the Srivijaya Empire controlled these waters and became fabulously wealthy by taxing every merchant ship that passed through. By the 14th century, the Malacca Sultanate turned the port city of Malacca into one of the richest trading centers on Earth. Chinese silk, Indian spices, Arabian incense, Javanese gold. Everything moved through here. The city was so diverse that traders spoke more than 80 different languages in its markets. That kind of wealth always attracts attention. In 1511, Portuguese forces conquered Malacca after realizing a simple truth. Whoever controls this strait controls the trade between East and West. The Portuguese held it for more than a century. Then the Dutch took it. Then the British. For 300 years, European empires fought over this narrow strip of water, not because of the land, but because of what passed through it. During World War II, the strait's importance reached a new level. When Japan invaded Southeast Asia in 1942, one of its primary objectives was controlling the Strait of Malacca, because it was the lifeline for oil flowing to Japan's war machine. The British knew this too. That's why Singapore, sitting at the southern entrance of the strait, was fortified as the Gibraltar of the East. When Singapore fell, Winston Churchill called it the worst disaster in British military history. Not because of the island itself, but because losing Singapore meant losing control of the strait, and losing the strait meant losing the war in Asia. Fast forward to today, and the Strait of Malacca has become even more critical. About 25% of all globally traded goods pass through here every year. That's roughly 100,000 ships annually, nearly 300 ships every single day. The strait carries more than 15 million barrels of oil daily. That's about a quarter of all seaborne oil trade, 3 times more than the Suez Canal. If the Suez closes, the global economy hiccups. If the Strait of Malacca closes, the global economy has a heart attack. China imports 80% of its oil, and 80% of that oil passes through this strait. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan face the same vulnerability. Some of the world's largest economies would grind to a halt within weeks. Even countries far away feel the impact. European factories rely on Asian components. American consumers rely on Asian manufacturing. Australian grain feeds Asian cities. All of it flows through Malacca. And here's where it gets terrifying. At its narrowest point, the strait is just 1.7 miles wide. Massive tankers and container ships squeeze through carefully controlled lanes, sometimes passing within a few hundred feet of each other. One accident, one sunken ship in the wrong place. And the entire strait could be blocked for days or weeks. The strait is bordered by Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. None of them can fully secure 550 miles of open water. And into that gap step the pirates. These aren't movie pirates. They're organized criminal networks. They track shipping movements. They strike fast. In the early 2000s, there were more than 150 attacks per year. Hijackings, ransom, stolen cargo worth millions. Piracy has decreased, but it hasn't disappeared. Every attack is a reminder of how fragile this choke point really is. And now we reach the real danger. Geopolitics. China calls this the Malacca dilemma. Its entire economy depends on a waterway it doesn't control, bordered by countries that aren't allies, and patrolled by the United States Navy. In a conflict, say, over Taiwan, the strait could be blocked. No oil, no gas, no raw materials, factories shut down, cities go dark. The economy collapses, without a single bomb hitting Chinese soil. So China's working on a solution. A strategy known as the String of Pearls. Ports, bases, strategic partnerships stretching from Asia to the Middle East. But the ultimate solution is the Kra Canal, a proposed canal across Thailand that would bypass the Strait of Malacca entirely. If built, it would reshape global trade overnight. Singapore would lose its strategic power. China would gain a choke point of its own creation. The United States would lose its leverage. The problem? The canal doesn't exist. It may never exist. Environmental damage, political resistance, massive costs. For now, it's a threat, a future option. Meanwhile, the United States is playing its own game. Naval patrols, military partnerships, freedom of navigation operations. A balance of power designed to keep the strait open and under no one's control. And then there's climate change. Rising seas, stronger storms, unpredictable currents. This waterway is already shallow and crowded. Climate stress makes it even more dangerous. Which brings us to the core reality. The Strait of Malacca is a single point of failure for the global economy. A collision, a blockade, a terrorist attack, an environmental disaster. Any one of these could shut it down, and if it happens, the consequences would be immediate. Oil prices spike, markets crash, factories close, food shipments stall. There is no backup plan. The global economy has built itself around the assumption that this strait will always be open. History tells us that assumptions fail. Empires rise, empires fall, miscalculations happen. And when the world's most important choke point sits in one of the world's most contested regions, the risk never disappears. That narrow strip of water isn't just a shipping lane. It's the central nervous system of global trade. 1,000 years of history compressed into 550 miles, a $3 trillion artery the world cannot afford to lose and cannot fully protect. The ships keep coming, the pirates keep watching, the great powers keep moving their pieces. And somewhere, in a war room or a boardroom, someone is asking the same question. What happens when the Strait of Malacca stops being a highway and becomes a weapon?